So if you're wondering when the M4 MacBook Air is going to be released, I come bearing great news because we finally have evidence pointing towards a release next month, as well as new benchmarks showcasing the insane performance this Mac has. Let's delve in. Courtesy of Apple guru Mr. Mark Gurman, we have news that Apple started preparing its marketing, sales and retail teams for the release of the M4 MacBook Air. There is also low inventory for the current models, and so that's usually a sign the new model's about to launch very soon. Now the only question that's left in my mind is whether we're going to see a press release or an actual virtual event for this release, and I'm leaning towards a press release. In fact, nowadays we get a press release with an event style video, and so the days of a live streamed event are coming to an end, especially for simple refreshes. Press releases are the way to go, and do remember last year they didn't even bother with a video. The M3 model only got a simple press release. And also the M4 following in the M3's footsteps release-wise would make sense, considering Apple now wants to stick to a more consistent release schedule for their Macs, and so considering we saw the M3 model last spring, it makes sense to follow that up a year later with the M4. That's what they did with the MacBook Pro, where we got the M3 model in October 2023, and then the M4 model in October 2025, and it's just easier for consumers because we would know exactly when to expect a new model. Now let's move on to benchmarks. There are Geekbench listings for the M4 MacBook Air, and guess what guys, you would not see this coming, but the MacBook Air performs exactly the same as the M4 iPad Pro. Whoa, who'd have figured? Jokes aside, we know how fast the M4 already is, so it's not exactly exciting news, but this Geekbench result listing was recorded on February 23rd with a machine that has a 10-core GPU and 24 gigs of RAM. By the way, this machine was running a special build of macOS Sequoia 15.2, and do remember back in December there were references found of M4 MacBook Airs in 15.2 codes, so that does confirm these benchmarks are legit. So what are the numbers, you may be wondering? You're not wondering? Well, I'm gonna tell you anyway. The GPU Metascore was 55,516, which is on par with the 13-inch iPad Pro, but worse than the M4 MacBook Pro because do remember that has a fan, the Air does not. The Metascore of the M3 model is around 48 to 49,000, so that's a decent improvement, but it's not groundbreaking. But you know what would be groundbreaking though? If you click that subscribe button, of course. It would bring you the latest about Apple right to subscription box, so please consider it. It would be appreciated. Join the Saranbyte gang now. Now, whilst the M4 MacBook Air will be a chipset refresh for the most part, I do expect some other changes, as we saw with the MacBook Pro. So for example, we can expect a center stage camera, which would be a nice change considering the camera is now going to be able to follow you around as you move, and you get access to desk view if you're presenting anything. The nano texture coating, I'm not sure if the Air is going to get, but considering the base iMac has this option, maybe the base MacBook Air also will follow suit. I do expect new colors though, because we've now had 2 generations of MacBook Air with the same set of colors, and so now that Apple's reusing this shell for the 3rd time, we can finally expect some new shades, hopefully something more vibrant, because the Air should just be a fun looking Mac. I've had enough of boring, serious looking Macs. We have the pros for that, it's time for some color. But of course, the big news will be 16 gigs of RAM as standards, which obviously is already the case with the M3 and M2 models, but regardless, that is a huge game changer for these new models, and I'm assuming once the M4 model launches, we should see the M3 model drop to $999. However, do remember Gurman did say there's low inventory of the M3 models, but it would be weird for them to phase that out and then still keep selling the M2. Now that's everything about the MacBook Air, but let's delve into other Macs we should see somewhat soon. So the next model to get refreshed is the Mac Studio. According to Mark Gurman, this was initially on track to launch with the MacBook Air, but has now been pushed back to June. However, I do want to call out Gurmy because he actually said the Mac Studio would launch during mid-2025 before, so where exactly is the delay here? Anyway, I think it makes sense to launch this at WWDC, that's where the last model launched, and if you think about it, a lot of creative professionals and developers, aka nerds, are going to be buying these, and so they're the ones watching WWDC in the first place. Now this is a desktop, but Apple is going to be reusing this shell for the 3rd time, so it would be nice to see a space black option, but considering the Mac Mini did not get any new color options, I do have my doubts about that. But hey, at the very least, the SD card reader moving to the front like the Mac Mini would be a nice change. Moving to the Mac Pro, I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but we have leaks that once again, Apple's having issues with producing an Extreme chipset for the higher-end Macs. So way back when, we had leaks about an M2 Extreme chipset coming to a future Mac Pro, which would essentially be 2 M2 Ultras stuck together using some insane glue Apple has. However, Apple then ran out of this glue and they couldn't stick these chips together, and so as a result we had a pretty underwhelming Apple Silicon refresh where it had the same exact chassis as before with the same performance as the smaller Mac Studio, whilst costing more and really only offering expandable storage as the only upgrades. But when I say expandable, you had to pay for Apple's expensive storage modules, so it was pretty useless. So all in all, this was a piss poor update, guys, and so many of us were hoping with the M4 generation of Macs, maybe we could finally get the M4 Extreme, which based on the M4 Max could offer up to 64 CPU cores and 160 GPU cores. That's many cores, and so that would offer mind-blowing levels of performance. But unfortunately it seems that once again, Apple's decided to ditch these plans. According to the information, Apple wants to free up engineering resources for an AI server chipset instead, since Apple Intelligence is the next big thing, and so for the time being, plans to make an Extreme chipset have been cancelled. Now John Gruber, who's another journalist, had made a good point that Apple starts development on their chips quite early on, and so whatever was dropped right now might not be the M4 or the M5 Extreme, and we may still see an M4 Extreme later this year because Apple's already finished developing that. I hope that's the case because, as I said, the Mac Pro is in a bit of an awkward spot since it currently does not offer enough differences to justify the much higher price compared to a Mac Studio. Anyway, let me know your thoughts in the comments, make sure to like and subscribe for more content like this, and thank you for watching. So if you're waiting for the new iPad Air, I come bearing great news because Apple suppliers are apparently preparing shipments for this as we speak, and so that could mean the new Air's launching very soon. Now, what are the main upgrades we could see with this new model? Are we getting OLED on the Air at last? No, not really. Let's delve in. Reliable leaker Mark Gurman has said the main upgrade with the brand new iPad Air is going to be a revolutionary new chipset, because clearly the M2 wasn't powerful enough to run the new calculator application. Now you would think it would make sense for this to get the M3, but apparently Apple's skipping that chipset entirely and bringing the mighty M4 to this iPad Air. So yes, the Pro and the Air will now share the same chipset, which is not the first time this has happened. Very briefly, the iPad Air and Pro shared the same M1 chipset, and ultimately I can understand why they're doing this because the M3 is based on the floor TSMC M3B process, whereas M4 is based on the much more efficient and easier to produce M3E process. I know that's just a bunch of letters, but basically what you need to know is that M4 is just better for Apple, okay? And especially considering